She's just a salesgirl who thinks she can waltz into our world wearing a dress she probably rented." The contemptuous words of Dmitry Volkov sliced through the elegant atmosphere of the Grandview Hotel's Crystal Ballroom at 8:47 p.m. on that fateful Saturday evening. His thick Russian accent made the insult even more venomous as he stood among his inner circle of executives, crystal champagne flute in hand, eyes fixed on the woman who had just entered through the grand marble archway. Katerina Zelenko paused at the entrance, her emerald green evening gown catching the light from the massive Swarovski chandelier overhead. At 28 years old, she was the youngest branch manager in the history of Volkov Industries' Dallas division, and tonight's Golden Anniversary Gala was supposed to be her formal introduction to the company's elite. The dress, worth $3,500, had arrived at her apartment that morning with a cryptic note. "For tonight, wear it with pride. From someone who believes in justice." She had assumed it was from her mentor at the company, though she'd never been able to confirm who that mysterious supporter actually was. The ballroom was a testament to obscene wealth, with 500 of Dallas's most influential business leaders mingling beneath gilded ceilings and Renaissance-inspired frescoes. Ice sculptures shaped like the Volkov Industries logo dominated each corner, while a 20-piece orchestra played classical arrangements from a raised platform. Everything about this night was designed to intimidate and impress, from the champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's monthly rent to the security detail that looked more like a private army than event staff. Now, if you're as outraged by powerful men who abuse their position as I am, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more stories about justice being served. And if you want to help this channel grow and continue exposing these truths, that thanks button below is an incredible way to show your support. Every contribution helps me tell more stories that matter. Katerina had noticed the hostile stares the moment she'd arrived. As she made her way through the crowd, conversations stopped mid-sentence, replaced by whispered comments and barely concealed sneers. She was an outsider in their world, promoted too quickly for their comfort, and worse, she was a woman who didn't know her place. The Old Boys Club of Volkov Industries had made their displeasure known through 1,000 small acts of sabotage over the past 3 months since her promotion. Missing emails, changed meeting times, locked conference rooms, all designed to make her fail. Standing near the champagne fountain, 4 men watched her approach with predatory interest. Dmitry Volkov himself, the 52-year-old CEO whose family had built their fortune through methods no one dared question too closely. Beside him stood Nikolai Petrov, the 45-year-old CFO whose wandering hands had driven 3 assistants to quit in the past year alone. Sergei Orlov, the 48-year-old COO, whose connections to Eastern European trafficking rings were an open secret among the executive team. And finally, Maxim Volkov, Dmitry's 30-year-old son and the company's CTO, whose expression seemed torn between anticipation and something else, perhaps regret. "Gentlemen," Dmitry said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been challenged, "I believe it's time we taught our ambitious little manager a lesson about knowing her station." He drained his champagne and set the glass on a passing waiter's tray with deliberate force. The Harvard Business Review interview she gave last week, suggesting our company needs modernization and transparency. Such words are declaration of war against everything we've built. What Dmitry didn't know, what none of them could have suspected, was that Katerina Zelenko was far more than she appeared. The sales background on her carefully crafted resume was real enough. She had indeed worked retail during her college years, But the 5-year gap in her employment history that she attributed to caring for sick family overseas told a different story entirely. Those years had been spent in dojos across Eastern Europe, training under masters who had taught her that true strength came not from size or intimidation, but from discipline, precision, and the element of surprise. She had earned her black belt at 23, won the Ukrainian national championship at 24, and by 25, she could disarm 3 opponents simultaneously without breaking a sweat. The orchestra shifted to a waltz as Katerina reached the center of the ballroom, where a microphone stand had been placed for the evening's presentations. According to the program, she was scheduled to speak at 9:15 p.m. about the new $12 million expansion project she'd been spearheading, a project that had already increased efficiency by 37% in trial runs. She straightened her shoulders, aware that every eye in the room was upon her, most of them hostile, all of them waiting for her to fail. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady despite the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. "Thank you for welcoming me to this celebration of Volkov Industries' 50 years of—" She paused, choosing her words carefully, "achievement." The slight hesitation was deliberate, a subtle indication that she knew exactly what kind of achievements had built this empire, and not all of them were worth celebrating. Nikolai Petrov moved first, circling behind her like a shark scenting blood in the water. His breath reeked of expensive vodka as he leaned close enough for her to smell his cologne, something French and overpowering. "Careful with your words, little girl," he whispered, his hand brushing against her lower back, in a gesture that would appear accidental to observers, but was anything but. "You're swimming in deep waters now." The first sign that tonight would not go according to their plan came from an unexpected source. Takeshi Yamamoto, the head of security for the event, had positioned himself near the main exit. To everyone else, he appeared to be just another hired guard in a black suit and earpiece. But the way he stood, the subtle shift in his stance as the executives surrounded Katerina, suggested combat training that went far beyond standard security work. His eyes tracked every movement, cataloging threats with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before in far more dangerous situations. At 9:14 p.m., just as Katerina was explaining the innovative supply chain modifications that would save the company millions, Dmitri gave an almost imperceptible nod to his associates. The plan they had discussed in the presidential suite earlier that evening was elegantly simple in its cruelty. Public humiliation was an art form in their world, a way to destroy someone without leaving fingerprints. They would make her look hysterical, unstable, unfit for leadership. The dress incident would be staged to look like an accident. Her reaction painted as an overreaction. And by Monday morning, she would have no choice but to resign in disgrace. Sergei Orlov approached from her left side, pretending to reach for a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. His foot caught the hem of her dress, deliberately, though he would later claim it was an accident. At the same moment, Nikolai moved behind her, his hands reaching for the delicate zipper that ran down the back of the gown. Maxim had his phone ready, positioned to record everything from an angle that would make their actions seem innocent while capturing her distress in high definition. And Dmitri stood directly in front of her, blocking any escape route, his massive frame ensuring she had nowhere to run. The entire sequence had been choreographed during their meeting in the presidential suite at 7:30 p.m. They had even practiced the movements, laughing about how she would probably cry, maybe even beg. Dmitri had promised bonuses all around once she was gone, and her position could be filled by someone more suitable, meaning male and compliant, and willing to look the other way when shipments from Eastern Europe arrived with documentation that didn't quite match the cargo. But at 9:15 p.m. exactly, as the four men moved to execute their plan, something extraordinary happened. Time seemed to slow down for Katerina as her training kicked in. She had recognized the setup from the moment Nikolai had started circling her. The positioning, the coordination, the false casualness of their movements. It was a pack-hunting strategy, and she had been trained to recognize and counter exactly this kind of attack. What happened next took exactly 3.7 seconds, though witnesses would later swear it felt like an eternity. As Sergei's foot caught her hem, instead of stumbling forward as expected, Katerina pivoted on her left heel, using the momentum to spin away from Nikolai's reaching hands. Her right palm shot upward, catching him in the throat with surgical precision. Not enough to cause permanent damage, but sufficient to send him gasping backward into a nearby ice sculpture. The move was pure textbook Kyokushin karate, executed with the fluid grace of someone who had practiced it 10,000 times. Sergei, still off balance from his attempted trip, found himself on the receiving end of a spinning heel kick that connected with his hip joint at exactly the right angle to send him crashing into the champagne fountain. The entire structure toppled, sending hundreds of glasses cascading across the marble floor in a symphony of shattering crystal. Golden champagne spread across the floor like a volatile river, turning the dance floor into a skating rink of expensive alcohol and broken dreams. Maxim, still holding his phone, seemed to freeze for a moment, his eyes meeting Katerina's with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then his father's voice roared behind him. "Get her, you fool!" And he lunged forward, more out of obligation than conviction. Katerina's response was swift and devastating. A knee strike to his solar plexus that doubled him over, followed by a gentle but firm push that sent him sliding across the champagne-slicked floor into the orchestra pit, where he landed with a discordant crash among the startled musicians. Dmitry Volkov, the titan of industry who had never been physically challenged in his entire privileged life, stood frozen for a split second as he watched his carefully planned humiliation turn into a disaster. His moment of hesitation cost him dearly. Katerina stepped forward, grabbed his extended arm with both hands, and executed a perfect shoulder throw that her sensei would have been proud of. The CEO of Volkov Industries flew through the air in an arc that would have been beautiful if it weren't so shocking, landing with a tremendous crash on the dessert table, sending tiramisu and crème brûlée flying in all directions. The ballroom fell silent, except for the groaning of four powerful men who had just learned a valuable lesson about underestimating their opponents. Katerina stood in the center of the chaos, her dress still perfectly intact, not even breathing heavily. She straightened her gown with deliberate calm, then walked back to the microphone, her heels clicking against the marble floor in the absolute silence. "As I was saying," she continued, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned ballroom, "the new expansion project represents a transformation in how we do business. Transparency, accountability, and respect for all employees regardless of gender or background. These aren't just buzzwords, gentlemen. They're the future of this company, whether you're ready for it or not." So here's my question for you. Do you think Maxim was really trying to help his father? Or was there something else going on with that hesitation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because the answer might surprise you. The security cameras had captured everything from multiple angles, their silent digital eyes recording every moment of the confrontation. What the executives didn't know was that those cameras had been upgraded just last week with equipment that streamed directly to a remote server. a server that happened to be monitored by some very interested parties who had been building a case against Volkov Industries for the past 18 months. Esmeralda Santos, who had been working the event as the DJ, slowly removed her headphones and spoke quietly into what appeared to be a decorative bracelet, but was actually a communication device. "Package delivered," she said in perfect English, despite her cover identity as a Spanish music coordinator. "All 4 targets engaged. Video evidence secured." The real shock of the evening, however, was yet to come. As Dmitry Volkov struggled to extract himself from the destroyed dessert table, covered in chocolate mousse and wounded pride, his son Maxim slowly got to his feet in the orchestra pit. The younger Volkov's face was a mask of conflicting emotions as he looked between his father and Katerina. Then he did something that no one expected. He started to laugh. Not the cruel laughter of mockery, but something that sounded almost like relief. "You want to know something funny, Father?" Maxim said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "She's absolutely right, about all of it. The modernization, the transparency, and especially the respect for employees." He climbed out of the orchestra pit, champagne still dripping from his expensive suit. "I've been documenting everything for months. Every offshore account, every trafficked worker, every bribe to customs officials. Did you really think I didn't know about the containers from Moldova? The ones marked as electronics that somehow weigh as much as people?" The revelation sent a shockwave through the room. Dmitry's face went from red with embarrassment to white with rage. "You dare betray your own blood?" he snarled, struggling to his feet amid the ruins of what had been a $10,000 dessert display. But Maxim wasn't finished. "Betray? You betrayed everything our grandfather built when you turned his legitimate shipping business into a criminal enterprise. You betrayed every young woman who came to America thinking she'd have a real job, only to find herself trapped in one of your entertainment facilities. You betrayed me the day you told me that conscience was a luxury the Volkov family couldn't afford." Katerina watched this family drama unfold with interest, but her trained eyes had noticed something else. The waitstaff, all 200 of them, had stopped what they were doing and formed a loose perimeter around the ballroom exits. It was subtle, professional, but unmistakable to someone with her training. These weren't ordinary catering staff. The way they moved, the way they positioned themselves, these were trained operatives. Judge Solomon Azikiwe, who had been quietly observing from his table near the stage, stood up slowly. The 60-year-old Nigerian-American federal judge commanded respect even in this room full of powerful people. "Mr. Volkov," he said, his deep voice resonating with authority, "I believe this would be an appropriate time to inform you that this gala has been under federal surveillance for the past 6 hours." The judge's words had barely registered when the ballroom's main doors burst open. But instead of the SWAT team Dmitry might have expected, a single woman walked in. She was 55 years old, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, wearing a black evening dress that somehow managed to look both sophisticated and tactical. She moved with the controlled grace of someone who had spent their entire life being ready for violence, but choosing not to use it unless absolutely necessary. "Hello, Katya," the woman said in accented English, and Katerina's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Her face went pale, then flushed as recognition dawned. "Mother?" Katerina whispered, the word barely audible even in the silent ballroom. Svetlana Mikhailovna smiled, an expression that transformed her face from severe to stunning. "Surprised, my little warrior?" You didn't think I'd miss your first major undercover operation, did you? She walked forward, her heels clicking against the marble with military precision. Though I must say, your takedown technique has improved considerably since you were training in Kiev. Your sensei would be proud. Wait, something's not adding up here. Why would her mother know about an undercover operation unless... Keep watching, because this next revelation is going to flip everything you thought you knew. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that no one in the room could have anticipated. Nikolai, still gasping from the throat strike, managed to croak out, "Undercover? She's a cop?" "Not exactly," said a familiar voice from near the main entrance. Agent Zara Nazari stepped into view, her FBI badge now prominently displayed on her evening dress. The 35-year-old Iranian-American agent had been posing as a society photographer all evening, her camera capturing much more than social moments. Special Agent Katerina Zelenko-Mikhailova, on loan to us from a joint task force you've probably never heard of. 18 months we've been building this case, and tonight, thanks to your spectacular display of criminal arrogance, you've given us everything we need. The revelation that Katerina was not just a branch manager, but a federal agent sent another shockwave through the crowd. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. Svetlana Mikhailova walked to the microphone, gently moving her daughter aside with a maternal touch that belied the steel underneath. "Dmitry Volkov," she said, her Russian accent much thicker than her daughter's. "We have unfinished business, you and I. 27 years ago, you betrayed a KGB operation in Moscow. You sold information to the highest bidder, causing the deaths of 12 good agents. One of them was my husband, Katerina's father." Dmitry's face, already pale, went absolutely white. "Svetlana? But you're dead. The report said you died in the Lubyanka prison fire." "The reports said many things," Svetlana replied coldly. "The CIA was remarkably creative when they extracted me and gave me a new identity. They were very interested in what I knew about former Soviet officials who were building criminal empires in the West. Officials like you, Dmitry." The mathematics of revenge had been calculating for over 2 decades, and now the equation was finally balanced. Svetlana had spent years working with Western intelligence agencies, helping them understand the networks that connected Russian organized crime to American businesses. When she learned that her daughter had been recruited for this operation, not knowing initially that Katerina was her daughter, she had pulled every string, called in every favor to be part of it. "The dress," Katerina said suddenly, understanding flooding her features. "You sent the dress?" "Every warrior needs proper armor," Svetlana replied with a slight smile. "Even if that armor happens to be designer evening wear, embedded with recording devices, courtesy of our Israeli friends at Mossad. That dress you tried so hard to destroy, gentlemen, has been transmitting everything to a satellite uplink since 8 p.m. Your conversation in the presidential suite at 7:30 about the entertainment facilities, the money laundering through the Dallas branch, even your charmingly detailed plan to humiliate my daughter, all recorded in crystal-clear audio." Nikolai made a desperate break for the exit, but found his way blocked by Takeshi Yamamoto, whose pleasant security guard demeanor had been replaced by something far more dangerous. "I wouldn't," Takeshi said simply, and something in his tone made Nikolai freeze. 15 years, Navy SEALs, 3 tours in Afghanistan. You really don't want to test me tonight. The sound of sirens was growing louder now, multiple vehicles converging on the Grandview Hotel from all directions. But inside the ballroom, time seemed to stand still as decades of planning reached their culmination. Sergei Orlov, still dripping with champagne, tried one last gambit. "You have nothing admissible. This was entrapment. My lawyers will destroy you in court." Judge Azikiwe stood up, his judicial robes somehow materializing from beneath his evening jacket. He had come prepared for this moment. "Actually, Mr. Orloff, everything that occurred tonight was in response to your own criminal actions. Agent Zelenko Mikhailova was conducting lawful surveillance when you and your associates attempted to assault her. Her response was clear self-defense, and your son's voluntary confession regarding your crimes on Armutai Paris, well, that's what we call a gift from the universe." Maxim stepped forward then, reaching into his jacket pocket. Several agents tensed, but he slowly withdrew a USB drive. 3 terabytes, he said quietly. Every transaction, every shipment, every bribe for the past 5 years. I started collecting it when I found out what was really in those containers from Moldova. His voice broke slightly. They were kids, some of them, teenagers who thought they were coming to America for legitimate jobs. The weight of his confession hung in the air like a physical presence. Dmitri looked at his son with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You're no son of mine," he spat. "No," Maxim agreed sadly. "I'm my mother's son, and she would be ashamed of what you've become." The mention of his late wife seemed to break something in Dmitri. His shoulders sagged, the fight going out of him as the reality of his situation became clear. 27 years of building a criminal empire, and it was all crashing down in a single night. Brought low by the daughter of a woman he'd thought was dead, and his own son's conscience. At 9:32 p.m. exactly, the ballroom doors opened again, and this time it was the full tactical response. FBI, DEA, ATF, and even ICE agents flooded in, their coordination speaking to months of planning for this exact moment. They moved with precision through the crowd, identifying and securing individuals whose names had appeared in the investigation. 47 arrests would be made that night, dismantling a network that stretched from Dallas to Moscow, from legitimate businesses to the darkest corners of human trafficking. Agent Nazari approached Katerina with a tablet, showing her the final tally. 280 million in assets frozen, 17 shell companies exposed, and enough evidence to keep the Justice Department busy for years. Not bad for a night's work. But Katerina wasn't looking at the tablet. She was watching her mother, who stood apart from the chaos, her face unreadable. 27 years of planning, of waiting, of working toward this moment, and now it was over. What came next? When revenge had been served and justice delivered. Svetlana must have sensed her daughter's gaze because she turned, and for a moment, the mask slipped. She wasn't a former KGB operative or a CIA asset or an instrument of vengeance. She was just a mother who had raised her daughter to be strong, to fight for justice, and to never back down from bullies, even when those bullies wore expensive suits and controlled billion-dollar empires. The orchestra, remarkably, had regrouped and began playing again. A choice that seemed surreal given the circumstances. But perhaps it was perfect. As federal agents led Dmitri Volkov away in handcuffs, Beethoven's Ode to Joy filled the ballroom, a symphony of justice that had been decades in the making. Esperanza Rodriguez, the 26-year-old accountant who had filed multiple harassment complaints against Nikolai only to see them buried by HR, stood near the champagne fountain's remains. She was crying, but they were tears of relief. "Is it really over?" she asked Katerina as they watched Nikolai being read his rights. "This part is," Katerina replied, her hand finding Esperanza's shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. "The trials will take months, maybe years, but yes, they'll never hurt anyone again." As the ballroom slowly emptied, with agents escorting suspects and witnesses providing statements, Maxim Volkov stood alone near the destroyed dessert table. He had just betrayed his father, destroyed his family's empire, and likely signed his own death warrant with the Russian mob. Yet, he looked more at peace than he had in years. Katerina approached him, her earlier combat readiness replaced by something softer. "That took courage," she said simply. "It took too long," he replied, his voice heavy with regret. "I knew what they were doing for years, and I was a coward. I told myself I was gathering evidence, but really, I was just afraid." "Fear isn't cowardice," Svetlana interjected, joining them. "Cowardice is knowing what's right and choosing to do nothing. You chose to act, even knowing the cost. That's the definition of bravery." The three of them stood there, an unlikely trinity brought together by crime and conscience, revenge and redemption. Outside, the Dallas skyline glittered with indifferent beauty, unaware that one of its most powerful corporate dynasties had just collapsed. Tomorrow, the headlines would scream about the scandal, the arrests, the international implications. But tonight, in this moment, it was just about individuals who had chosen to stand up against power, regardless of the personal cost. At 10:45 p.m., as the last of the suspects was led away and the crime scene tape was being strung across the ballroom, Special Agent in Charge Jennifer Walsh arrived to oversee the final procedures. She found Katerina still in her emerald dress, now slightly torn from the evening's activities but still remarkably intact. "Outstanding work, Agent," Walsh said, though her tone suggested this was an understatement. "This operation will be taught at Quantico for years. The combination of human intelligence, technical surveillance, and tactical execution, it's textbook perfect." "It wasn't just me," Katerina replied, looking around at the team that had made this possible. "Everyone played their part perfectly." Walsh nodded, then lowered her voice. "There's been discussion at the highest levels. After this success, you could write your own ticket. Any department, any assignment. Hell, the director himself wants to meet you." But Katerina was looking at her mother, who was providing her statement to another agent. 27 years of separation, of not knowing if the other was alive, of living with the ghosts of the past. "I think," she said slowly, "I need to take some time first. There's a lot of catching up to do." The celebration of justice was short-lived. As the clock struck 11 p.m., Svetlana's expression suddenly changed, her trained instincts detecting something the others had missed. "Katya," she said urgently, "where's the fourth USB drive?" "What fourth drive?" Katerina asked, but her mother was already moving toward the orchestra pit, where Maxim had fallen earlier. In the chaos of the arrests, no one had noticed the small figure who had been hiding among the musical instruments, a figure now trying to slip out through the service entrance. "Stop her!" Svetlana commanded, and several agents immediately moved to intercept. The woman they caught was dressed as a violinist, but her hands were too soft, her posture too rigid for a professional musician. When they removed her wig and glasses, Katerina gasped. It was Natasha Volkov, Dmitri's supposedly estranged sister, who had been declared dead in a Moscow car bombing 5 years ago. "Hello, niece," Natasha said with a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. Or should I say, Agent Mikhailova. This was the 6th and final major twist that would complete the puzzle. Natasha had been the shadow puppeteer all along, using her brother as a front, while she built an even darker empire from the presumed grave. The trafficking, the money laundering, Dmitri had been brutal but straightforward. Natasha had been surgical, invisible, and infinitely more dangerous. "The drives Maxim gave you are incomplete," Natasha continued, enjoying the shock on their faces. They show Dmitri's operations, yes, but not the real network. Did you really think my brother had the intelligence to run operations in 17 countries? He could barely manage his own staff meetings without my guidance. Agent Walsh immediately raised her radio, but Natasha laughed. Oh, please do call for backup. Check the hotel's registration system. Check very carefully. As the FBI's technical team ran the data, their faces went pale. The Grandview Hotel's guest list for tonight included over 200 individuals, all registered under legitimate identities, all with clean backgrounds. But facial recognition was now revealing a different story. My God, Walsh breathed. They're all operatives. Not all yours, though, Natasha said with satisfaction. Some FSB, some Mossad, some MI6, quite a few CIA, and yes, your FBI friends. This little party has been a joint operation from the start, my dear. Every major intelligence agency has been watching the Volkov Empire, each thinking they were the only ones. The revelation sent ripples of confusion through the room. Agents looked at each other with sudden suspicion, hands moving subtly toward weapons. The waitstaff that Katerina had identified as operatives, they weren't all FBI. This had been a massive multi-agency operation that had somehow been orchestrated without the different groups knowing about each other. Svetlana stepped forward, and her next words changed everything once again. She's right about one thing. This has been a joint operation, but not in the way she thinks. She pulled out an identification that made even Natasha's smug expression falter. Interpol Special Operations Division. I've been coordinating with all agencies for the past 3 years. Every person in this room with operational training is exactly where they're supposed to be. The grand deception was finally revealed in its full scope. What had appeared to be a simple FBI sting had actually been one of the largest coordinated international law enforcement operations in history. 200 agents from 12 different agencies, all brought together under Interpol's umbrella to take down not just the Volkov Empire, but the entire network it connected to. Impossible, Natasha sputtered. The protocols, the jurisdictional issues, were waived under the International Organized Crime Treaty of 2019, Judge Azikiwe interrupted, producing a document from his briefcase. A treaty that Russia, ironically, was instrumental in drafting after the Moscow hotel bombings. The same bombings you staged to fake your death, Ms. Volkov. As the full weight of the trap became clear, Natasha's composure finally cracked. She lunged for the service door, but found her path blocked by none other than Takeshi Yamamoto and 3 other individuals who had shed their catering uniforms to reveal tactical gear. The takedown was swift and professional. No drama, no excessive force, just the quiet efficiency of professionals doing their job. With Natasha in custody, the final pieces of the operation clicked into place. The 200 guests began revealing their true affiliations, and the ballroom transformed into something resembling a United Nations of law enforcement. British accents mixed with Hebrew, Russian with Spanish, as agents who had been maintaining their covers for months finally got to drop the pretense. Maxim, who had been silent during these revelations, finally spoke. Aunt Natasha was the one who recruited me originally. She said we were going to reform the company from within, make it legitimate. I believed her until I realized she was just using me to spy on my father while she built something worse. You did the right thing coming to us, Agent Walsh assured him. Your cooperation is the only reason you're not in handcuffs right now. As the various agencies began coordinating the massive intelligence haul from the evening's operation, Katerina found herself standing with her mother on the balcony overlooking the Dallas skyline. The city lights twinkled below, oblivious to the dramatic scenes that had just unfolded 20 stories above. 27 years? Katerina said softly. You planned all of this for 27 years? No, my dear, Svetlana replied. I planned revenge for about 5 years. Then I met your stepfather. You remember David from Cincinnati? He taught me that revenge is just anger with a college education. What we did tonight wasn't revenge. It was justice. There's a difference. The trials that followed would indeed take months. The evidence collected that night led to arrests in 17 countries, the liberation of over 300 trafficked individuals, and the recovery of nearly $500 million in stolen and laundered funds. Dmitry Volkov was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Natasha received an even harsher sentence after evidence emerged of her involvement in multiple assassinations. Nikolai and Sergei each got 40 years, their crimes finally catching up to them. Maxim, in recognition of his cooperation and the evidence he had provided, received immunity in exchange for his continued testimony. He used his newfound freedom to establish a foundation helping trafficking victims rebuild their lives, funded by his personal fortune that he liquidated entirely. It's blood money, he said at the foundation's opening. The least I can do is use it to heal some of the wounds my family created. 6 months after that fateful night at the Grandview Hotel, Katerina stood in a very different venue, a small community center in Dallas, where she was teaching self-defense to a group of young women. She had turned down the promotions, the commendations, the offers from various agencies. Instead, she had chosen something simpler, but no less important. Remember, she told her students, strength isn't about being able to fight. It's about knowing you can, which gives you the confidence to walk away from most confrontations. But when someone crosses that line, when they try to take your dignity, your safety, your choice away from you, that's when you remind them that underestimating someone based on their appearance is a potentially painful mistake. As her students practiced their forms, Katerina noticed a familiar figure in the doorway. Svetlana stood there, watching with obvious pride. The two had spent the past months rebuilding their relationship, sharing stories of the years apart, healing wounds that went deeper than any physical injury. You teach well, Svetlana said after the class ended. Your father would be proud. Both of them would be, Katerina replied, referring to both her biological father and David, the stepfather who had helped transform her mother from an instrument of revenge into an agent of justice. The story of the corporate gala that turned into an international law enforcement operation became legend in certain circles. But for the public, it was simply reported as a massive corruption scandal that brought down a major corporation. The details of the dress, the karate, the decades-long planning, those remained classified, known only to those who were there and those with the clearance to read the full reports. In the end, the message was beautifully simple. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against oppression isn't a gun or a badge or even skillful martial arts. Sometimes it's the courage to stand up when they try to tear you down, the wisdom to gather allies in unexpected places, and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to let justice rain down like champagne from a toppled fountain. And sometimes, just sometimes, that justice comes wearing an emerald green evening gown and a smile that says, you should have known better than to underestimate me. The dress, that $3,500 symbol of elegant resistance, now hangs in Katerina's closet, retired but not forgotten. A reminder that even the most beautiful armor is still armor, and that true strength comes not from never being challenged, but from rising every single time someone tries to pull you down.